we'll start with this, and this really is one of the more bizarre stories floating around in the sport of boxing, at least in my opinion. This story flies largely under the radar because it involves a baby belt.
Not even a full world title.
I've never seen such a vigorous effort to reclaim a baby belt. Charr wins appeal, reinstated as WBA titleist, box off to follow. Thanks to a loophole, Manuel Charr will get to keep his portion of the World Boxing Association WBA title, as well as plans for an oft-rescheduled clash with Oquendo. As part of a four-man tournament, the sanctioning body is prepared to order. Another portion of the article reads, Charr was removed as champion last November, 2 months after having tested positive for 2 separate banned substances through the voluntary anti-doping agency testing protocol ahead of a scheduled September 29th clash with Oquendo. According to the WBA resolution, WADA's rules provide that an athlete has the right to be notified of the scheduled date, time, and place for the B-sample analysis, quote-unquote, Doping Control Part 1, Section 7.3. They also provide that an athlete must be provided notice of the opportunity for the athlete and or the athlete's representative to attend the B-sample opening and analysis, Section 7.3e. The second sample opening and testing was presumably conducted at a WADA-approved laboratory. There is no evidence that the laboratory separately informed Charr or his representative of the place, date, and time for opening and testing of the second sample. Neither WADA nor the WBA has adopted the WADA protocols or rules except for the prohibited substances list. Charr's appeal of the WBA ruling was filed under these grounds, along with proof of a clean test result conducted by WADA on September 29th, the day of the rescheduled fight. Given the lapse in testing between the A and B samples of the original test, the WBA had no choice but to rule in favor of reinstating him as the regular champion. Well, you want to talk about loopholes? That's a loophole. That's a technicality if I've ever seen one. It appears that because neither Manuel Charr or one of his representatives was in attendance at the WADA lab that opened up his B sample, it appears that since none of them was there, that threw the findings right out the door. That, never mind resolving why there are 2 separate banned substances in this man's year analysis, never mind resolving that and holding him accountable for it, holding him accountable to it, never mind that, because neither he or one of his representatives was in attendance for the opening of the B sample.
No, it's no good.
Funniest thing about that, I've never really seen one of these cases get thrown out due to the B sample anyway. The B sample usually corroborates what's in the A sample. But that's besides the point, because they're not even focused on why this guy had 2 banned substances in his urine. They're not focused on that. The focus seemed to have shifted to Manuel Charr. Neither Manuel Charr or his representative were in attendance for the opening of the B sample, thus
gets thrown out?
That snafu in the protocol renders those samples inadmissible, I guess. That's what it sounds like. So Manuel Charr tried to appeal it and conducted a separate test on the day that he was supposed to be fighting Oquendo. They tested him again on September 29th, and apparently that came out clean, even though that test coming out clean is coming well after he tested positive.
Back in August when he tested him.
News of him testing positive broke before the 29th. It broke on September 20th. And that news was regarding a test which was conducted in August. You was dirty in August, but you was clean by the end of September. Oh, that changes everything, I guess. I mean, isn't this a common sense kind of question? How does testing clean in September absolve you of testing positive in August? Presumably, if you tested positive in August, whatever substance is in your body may burn up as time wears on in September. So, I mean, testing positive, I'm not sure how that's supposed to lend credence to the notion that there's no foul play.
Well, there wasn't.
I'll tell you, look, Manuel Charr said something very interesting, that why would he use a performance-enhancing drug for Oquendo, who's a very old guy and hasn't fought in a very long time? That's yet another layer of this that makes it even more bizarre. We'll touch on that. And that's intriguing. But at the end of the day, these substances were found in your body. Regardless of what you want to say, they found this shit in your body, and, ideally, you would be held accountable for it. Whereas here, it seems that, loophole, technicality, whatever, here's your title back. This revolving door kind of policy, when it comes to these situations where guys test positive, you'll notice that a lot of these guys that tested positive, the penalties really weren't that harsh. They didn't come at a particularly high cost. And that makes a lot of this seem like just a, I don't know, like a gregarious formality that, when a guy tests positive, it makes a lot of news. But in terms of penalties, they don't actually offer much, because this guy's right back in the mix. And the 2 substances that were found in his body, we don't gotta explain that, because, it was a technicality. Essentially, what I'm getting at is, these sanctioning bodies working with the Voluntary Anti-Doping Association, that's a step in the right direction, but they have yet to take the next step. The kind of a step that would really deter these guys from pursuing these, competitive edges, these advantages. Because while they may be doing what they have to do to catch these guys in the act, it's what happens after they catch them that is really going to make the biggest difference. And as it stands, they seem to have a revolving door policy on just how long does it take for a guy who tests positive. In Manuel Charr's case, for 2 separate banned substances, just how long should it take before we see a guy like that reintegrated into the ranks and being allowed to box again? How long should it take?
It came right back.
Because right now it seems like, these guys test positive, but they're right back in the mix just a matter of weeks or months later. And that doesn't send out the right message, quite honestly. It doesn't. So now what we're looking at is a proposed fight between Manuel Charr, who is reinstated as the WBA regular champion, and Frez Oquendo, a man who hasn't fought in, 4 years now? I mean, this guy is clearly past his prime. Seriously.
He's 46.
And that's the bizarre part about it. That somehow this guy's name is still floating around, and it's all due to this version of the WBA title. He has a legal claim to fight for that title. That's why you keep seeing his name floating around, even though the man hasn't fought in 4 years. And what I'm wondering is, does Frez Oquendo really want this title shot at his age? And given what happened to Adonis Stevenson, for example, given the bloody mess that we saw this past Saturday with Badu Jack, is it safe to allow a man like Frez Oquendo, who hasn't fought in something like 4 years, and he's a very old guy, very old.
He's 46.
Is it safe to even allow this man to fight for that version of the title, even though, he's got a legal claim to it? That's what it is. But is it safe?
After 4 years,
is it ethical
inactive,
to allow him to fight for that title? It's bizarre. It really is bizarre. I've never seen this kind of an effort go into procuring or obtaining a baby belt. I can only infer that maybe Manuel Charr wants to hang on to that because he knows what it could bring. Potential big paydays with someone like Anthony Joshua, who holds the full version of that title. That's the only motivating factor I can think of that could resolve why people are fighting so hard to hold this belt. But either way, I'll tell you that it really is strange. It's strange to me that Manuel Charr was exonerated in the way that he was for the reason he was exonerated, and it's even more bizarre that Frez Oquendo is, his name is still in contention for a version of a world title. Any version. His name being in contention for any version of a world title is truly bizarre to me. Moving on. In other news, it appears that Chris Algieri is confident that he can raise his level in a title fight against WBO champion Maurice Hooker. And in the article, it discusses the varying characteristics of this past weekend's fight Algieri had with Danny El Gallo Gonzalez, and how, the performance, it really wasn't the best. That Chris Algieri himself addresses that he didn't look his best out there, but he managed to get the win. And that he can turn up when necessary, that he is known for pulling off the unexpected. And these are just my passing thoughts. The fighter that I saw this past weekend, that version of Chris Algieri, is a version that I think needs another tune-up. If he is to really try to go after Maurice Hooker, a young undefeated fighter who's also a world champion, who's been showing improvement and getting better and winning fights in better fashion than he had been in the past, if you to stand a chance against a guy that has that much momentum, then, there's more cobwebs to shake off, because the performance that I saw was a little bit flat. In terms of the technique department, the technique was definitely there. The output, the variety of punches, the positioning, all of that. Those things were there. But from a physical standpoint, that's where I think Chris Algieri exhibited some problem areas. Now, Chris Algieri has never been very much of a big puncher.
It's not going to start now.
And I don't think that's going to change even now. I don't think that he's going to suddenly become a more concussive puncher than he had been in previous years. But what I do think that he can work towards is his endurance, his athleticism, and his mobility. Because if he is to stand any chance at all against Maurice Hooker, those are the kinds of things that would be integral to his success, or at least giving it a good go, giving him a good fight. The Chris Algieri that I saw this weekend, if he were going on to face Maurice Hooker next, for example,
be in big trouble.
That's a Chris Algieri, I have no doubts, doesn't make it to the mid-portion of the fight. I think Maurice Hooker would dispatch him at or around the 6th round. Now, this is only a talking point because, you know, Chris Algieri's fight this past weekend with Daniel Gallo Gonzalez, that was for the international version of Maurice Hooker's title. Essentially, it's another baby belt. But that baby belt does help to position the winner of the fight, the winner being Chris Algieri. That baby belt helps to position the winner of the fight to fight for a full version, the full version of the WBO title at 140 pounds. You know, 140 is not as talked about a division as 147. And it's because, you know, a lot of the guys at 147, they already have established legacies and bigger bodies of work than the young guys at 140. The young guys at 140, they're making their names for themselves right now. Maurice Hooker, Jose Ramirez, Regis Prograis, Josh Taylor, Ivan Bedenchik, Kirill Rillik. These guys don't have the body of work that the guys at 147 have. They're building upon that. But I will tell you that it's very hard. I imagine that it would be very hard for a guy like Chris Algieri to procure some kind of a world title in that weight class. There are some interesting situations out there for him, and not all of them involve a world title. There are other opportunities there, but I think that maybe Chris should look at some of those other opportunities before he decides to fight for a world title, because if he goes on from how he looked with Danny to getting into a fight with Maurice for his title, I have no doubts he gets starched. You know, those eggs need more bacon. That's all I'm saying. In other news, in regards to the upcoming unification match at middleweight between IBF champion Daniel Jacobs and WBC and WBA champion Canelo Alvarez, it appears that there is a rehydration limit stipulated into the contract. In violation of that rehydration limit could result in some hefty fines. Now, I saw the news about this floating around. How a lot of people are interpreting this news as Canelo Alvarez attempting to weight drain Daniel Jacobs to gain a competitive advantage. It being that Daniel Jacobs is already a man of bigger physical dimensions than Canelo Alvarez. Canelo is a short, stocky guy. Daniel Jacobs is a tall, statuesque, and athletic fighter. And it's conceivable that given his frame and the potential weight at which he could rehydrate, that might give him a sizable physical advantage over the smaller Canelo Alvarez. So Canelo's not going to cut any corners. He's going to make sure that Daniel Jacobs can't rehydrate past a certain weight. Now, you might be thinking to yourself that, well, how is that an issue when the IBF already has a rehydration limit? That's just it. That rehydration limit that was in play
over a year ago,
ahead of the Gennady Golovkin versus Daniel Jacobs fight, their fight, that rehydration limit that forced Daniel Jacobs to not fight for the IBF. He was fighting for the WBA and the WBC. But it being that he didn't participate in that particular weigh-in, he was not actually in contention for all three of what were Gennady Golovkin's then titles. He was only, you know, if he had won the fight, he only would have won the WBC and the WBA. The IBF, that would have just stayed vacant.
had he won.
But that, rehydration cap that the IBF used to have, it's no longer in play. They abolished it in the event of unification fights. That's saying that if there's more than one world title on the line, the IBF lifts that rehydration limit. Now, that's only in the event of unification fights like this one between Jacobs and Canelo. But when it comes to regular IBF-sanctioned bouts, regular ones like the one that Jacobs just had with Sergey Didivinchenko, that rehydration limit is still in play. And it is for this reason that you don't see me complaining. Daniel Jacobs was just subject to such a limit in his last fight. Now, you didn't see me complaining about that, and I didn't see anybody else complaining about that. I don't know if you watching this video in particular were complaining, but I can say that I myself was not complaining about the IBF's rehydration limit in Daniel Jacobs' last fight.
It was the same as this one.
And this rehydration limit in this fight that's being stipulated into the contract, this rehydration limit really ain't no damn different than the one that Jacobs was just subject to. So if I didn't complain about the last one, why would I complain about this one? The only difference between this one and that one is the last one was coming from the IBF and this one is coming from Canelo. But all the same,
the limit ain't changed.
It's pretty much the same deal. That he can't exceed 10 pounds once he rehydrates. It's the same fucking limit. The only difference is who it's coming from. That is, the only real difference is who's setting the rehydration limit. Now, I'll tell you that I saw a lot of the comments, a lot of the videos that were floating around at the time that this news broke. People reacting adversely to this. People trying to say that Canelo Alvarez is trying to weight drain Daniel Jacobs. But ahead of this unification match, Daniel Jacobs wouldn't be any more weight drained in this fight than he was in his last fight. Did you guys think he was weight drained in his last fight? Because he was subject to a 170-pound rehydration limit in that fight, and he's subject to that same limit in this fight. So if you didn't think he was weight drained in his last fight, why would you all of a sudden turn around and say he's weight drained in this fight? It's the same limit. He just competed at that same limit. Understand that I am not a fan of Canelo Alvarez. I am fully aware of how he uses and flexes his A-side muscle to leverage things in his favor. I've got no problem pointing out how he's got away with judges, sketchy decisions, sketchy scoring. Anybody that follows this channel knows that I don't pull punches on Canelo Alvarez. But anybody that follows this channel also knows that I try to be unbiased and I try to call it down the middle. And all I see here is that the only difference between the last rehydration limit and this rehydration limit, the only real difference is who it's coming from. But the limit itself stayed the same. So why would I complain about that? You know, I can understand how there are people out there who might be feeling right now that Daniel Jacobs needs just about every advantage ahead of a fight with Canelo, of all people. He needs just about every advantage that he can get. I truly understand that sentiment, and I even sympathize, because I feel that, yeah, that's definitely true. I understand that. But saying that Canelo's weight draining him, that's not exactly true. I mean, no, it's not true. He wouldn't be any more weight drained in this fight with Canelo than he was in his last fight with Sergey Dedevianchenko. Now, if you weren't bitching and moaning at the IBF for their rehydration limit, then I don't see how you could get so up in arms about this rehydration limit. The last one didn't hamper, Danny Jacobs' ability to fight. The last rehydration limit didn't hinder his ability to become a world champion. He was still able to compete at the elite level. And that limit was the same limit that you're looking at here. So, the stuff about him being weight drained, not really. I mean, how? I could understand if it's Canelo saying, fight me at 155. God forbid we ever have to deal with that shit again. But I could understand if it was something like that. But this? Nah, that's really not the same thing.